Welcome back to the channel, everybody. My name's Nick and this is Idaho Up, and today we're going to be doing a complete stereo upgrade on the Vanderhall. Now this is going to be a detailed stereo installation, so I broke it down into YouTube chapters in case you're looking for something more specific. For example, if you're trying to figure out how to wire up a new head unit, you can skip to that chapter. Or if you're trying to figure out how to wire up some new speakers up front, or maybe a subwoofer in the rear, you can skip to that chapter as well. Now before we get into this, if you haven't done the three things, make sure you go ahead and do that. I can tell you that every subscription I get motivates me to put out more content, and I truly thank you guys that have already subscribed. And with that said, let's get into this. Okay guys, I want to start this out by going over the products that I chose for this install. But first, I wanted to tell you that I didn't break the bank doing this project. This entire install cost me about $650 and several hours in the garage. And I can tell you that the end result sound quality is perfect. It's exactly what I was looking for. So let's start by talking about the Velex head unit you see in front of you. This is a marine grade head unit, meaning it is water resistant, so it's perfect for the Vanderhall. It also comes with an integrated amp that has 150 watts by 2 channels, both peak and RMS power. Next up are the speakers I chose, which are these Kicker 6.5-inch speakers, which is a perfect fit for the Vanderhall. These are also marine grade speakers, so they are water resistant, and these ones have an LED lighting option, and I chose that because they honestly weren't that much more expensive than the normal speakers. Also, if I later decide I don't like the lighting, I can just turn it off and run it as a normal speaker. These are 65 watts RMS continuous power and 195 watts peak power at 4 ohms. If you're going to go with the LED lighting option, there are some other things you're going to want to consider buying, and one of them is this wiring for the LED lighting. I purchased about 20 feet of this, but honestly it was overkill. You'll get away with 8 to 10 feet just fine. You'll also want to get this Kicker remote control for the LED lighting. And one of the reasons for that is that you'll just have better control over how you present that lighting. But the more important reason is that it comes with this wiring harness that makes installation a lot easier, because you just connect the corresponding colors and then plug it into the harness that has one ground and one power source. So here's the powered subwoofer I chose to go with. It's a 6x8 with 100 watts continuous power, and it's super compact. I wanted a little bass in my music, but I didn't want something to rattle my ears out, and I also didn't want something that was huge that took up all the space in the Vanderhall storage compartment. This fit the bill perfectly, and it worked out great. You're also going to want to get an amplifier wiring kit, and this is the one I chose to go with. And you'll notice that there's no RCA cables included, and that's because the head unit I chose to go with doesn't have RCA cable hookups. The ones you see here are not for an amplifier. This is an option in case you want to connect your phone directly to the unit without using the Bluetooth unit. So instead of using RCA cables to hook it up to the head unit, I'm going to be using the harness that was included with the powered sub to still the signal from both the left and the right front speakers. So before we get started on this install, there are a couple things I want to point out. One being is that the powered sub is not a marine grade item, but because it's going to be put in the storage compartment of the Vanderhall, I think it'll be okay. The other thing is that this plug right here is a USB plug, so you can charge your phone off the head unit, and it's continuous power, so you can charge your phone regardless of whether the vehicle is on or off. And with all that said, let's get into this install. Okay, the first thing you're going to want to do is disconnect the negative battery terminal. You're going to be dealing with a lot of electrical wires, and you don't want to shock the system or yourself. Now we're going to take the dash apart. There's about 20 bolts in the dash, and you want to take them all out so you can remove it. And this is a good time to mention that you might want to get a couple different containers. We're going to be taking different bolts out from various points in the Vanderhall, and you don't want to get them mixed up. So two of the gauges on the instrument cluster and the two gauges in the center share the same plugs. So you're going to want to mark them before you take them out. I used a piece of painter's tape to do this so I wouldn't get them confused when I plugged them back in. I also used the same trick for all of the toggle switches. Taking the time to do this now is going to save you a lot of time later. When you pull out the stock Bluetooth controller, you're going to disconnect it from the toggle switch it's connected to and retain the toggle switch, but you're not going to retain the Bluetooth controller, so you can just set it to the side. When it comes to the heater floor vent control, this comes out with the entire dash panel, so you're going to have to get underneath it and disconnect it. And it turns out that mine wasn't even being retained by a nut, and the vent wasn't even opening and closing all the way. So when I put it back in, this will be a good opportunity to correct both those issues. At this point, you can take out the entire dash, and you'll notice the only three things left connected are the heater floor vent control, the heater fan speed control, and the start and stop button. Okay, so if you're doing a complete upgraded stereo install, you're gonna have to take off the hood panel, this side panel that runs right above the exhaust, and the windshield and the panel underneath it. And then after you get those panels off, I just recommend you leave them off until the entire stereo's done. Don't be trying to put them on midway through because you might forget to connect a wire and just have to take it off again. So just take them off, and then when you think you're all done, test the stereo. If everything's good to go, put them all back on. So when you take off the hood, it's just 8 bolts total, 4 on both sides. And then this is just a demonstration of me taking off the rest of the panels and the windshield, just in case you're curious where some of those bolt locations are. I'm also going to say that you should probably just go ahead and take the car apart before you mess with the dash. The reason for that is because once you get this panel underneath the windshield off, it's way easier to identify all the wires, and it might be helpful when you're taking the switches out of the dash. Now we're going to work on the Bluetooth head unit installation. And the first thing we need to do is remove the heater floor vent control because it's no longer going to be here. I have to cut a hole right here, and that's where the Bluetooth head unit's going to sit. So I'll remount the heater control under the dash. We'll talk more on that later. So I just used a bracket that's going to hold the head unit to trace the best line I could, and then I came back with a straight edge to just make it a little straighter prior to cutting it. I used a jigsaw with a metal bit to cut the hole for the head unit, and it seemed to work out alright, but it was a little tricky, so make sure you're watching your fingers. You don't want to lose one. Okay, so I ran into an issue right here, and that's when I went to put the dash back in. The top of the new Bluetooth head unit was hitting this metal right here. So I'm gonna have to notch that out to put the dash flush. Just wanted to point on that. I'm just gonna get my saw out, the one I used to cut this hole, and notch that out. So after verifying that the panel would fit, I decided to move on by removing the factory amp. And these are the bolts that hold it in under the dash. So you're just going to want to undo those and undo the harness so that you can drop the factory amp. So here's a shot of the factory amp underneath the dash, and after you undo the bolts up top, you might have to rattle it a little to get it out, but it comes out pretty easily. And then all you have to do is ensure that you unplug the harness and the amp's out. Okay guys, from here I recommend that you don't mess with any of the wires until everything else is in its place. Meaning, I'm gonna take the new amp and I'm gonna mount it where the old amp was, but I'm gonna have to put a couple more screws in there because they're not lining up with the screws on the new amp. And then I'm gonna get the powered subwoofer in the back, and I'm gonna get all the wires laid out. And part of the reason I'm doing that is because, well, one reason is because I am not using RCA cables to connect to the head unit to the amp, to the powered sub. I'm gonna be using speaker wires to tap into the front speakers to get that amp to turn on and make that sub work. The other reasons, some other reasons are the LED wiring to the speakers. I wanna have that all laid out and ready to connect as well. And the reason I don't wanna connect any wires is because I'm fearful that because there's gonna be some double connections going to the same wire in a lot of locations, that I might forget a wire and I'm gonna have to cut it and resolder it. So I'm just gonna have everything laid out, power to the sub, ground to the sub, speaker wires ran, LED speaker wires ran, everything in its general location. And then at the end, we'll go through and we'll connect each wire right at the end. And hopefully it turns out all right. Here's the powered sub I'm gonna use. It's a JBL BassPro Nano. And you can see the size, how small this is. I think it'll be perfect for the compartment in the back of the Vanderhall. But I just wanted to give you a quick look at it, kind of explain how I'm wiring it, because I am not, again, using those RCA cables. I'll be using the stock version of powering it. So here's the wiring harness, the plug's in there. Got your power wire that goes to the battery, your ground wire, and then you have your blue remote turn on that goes to the head unit to turn the amp on, and the subwoofer when the car powers up. And then you got your left and right speakers, and these will be going to the speakers on their left and right side up by the driver. So, and that's where the sound signal comes from to get the woofer going. So Oh yeah, and it does have a bass turn up level knob, and I'll mount this somewhere pretty far up under the dash just so it's not getting wet. So then you got your mounting hardware. So that's what it looks like. That's what's going in the back, and I'm just gonna set it back there right now and just kind of start running wires around to make sure I don't forget anything. Okay, here's the sub, and this is kind of what I think I might be doing. I might mount it right here in the middle. So see how that works out, and then I'll still have a little bit of storage on both sides of it and in the front of it. So I've got some extra pieces of metal that I might tie into those 2 bolts that are wide enough that then I can mount the sub to the pieces of metal. So I think that's what I'll do, and then I can just tuck all the wires right into the carpet and figure out how I want to get to the battery. So that might just be simply a hole through this, but we have to make sure there's no gas tank or anything in the way. So remember that, not just be putting bolts back here wherever you want without figuring out where the gas tank is. You don't want to be punching through it. So right here I think I'd be okay because it's directly above the battery, and I can get under here and make sure I'm not going through anything. So then I can get power to it, and I'll probably just use the same ground that the battery's on, so I can ground it right here. So I'm gonna start messing around with that, see what I come up with. Okay, so this was a pleasant surprise. So once you pull up the carpet, I thought I was gonna have to put some holes in here, and there's actually some small holes, but there's also a big one back there. So I'm just gonna run the lines through that hole, and they go right to the battery compartment. Now I'm going to show you how I chose to mount the amp. And what I did is I took the included hardware, mounted it to the amp, and then bent it to a 90-degree angle. I then took 2 pieces of scrap metal I had and attached it to this angle using small bolts. I then slid it into the storage compartment of the Vanderhall, and using 2 bolts inside the Vanderhall, I mounted it and tightened all the bolts down, and it actually ended up being a very solid mounting option. It also looks pretty good.
You're chilling in the rain. You're some kind of butterfly. Baby, you give me midnight. You whip up my appetite. Don't leave me here high and dry. Baby, you give me ice and fire. You're channeling wind and rain. You're some kind of butterfly. Don't leave me here high and dry. Oh, 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 oh,
Before we mount the amp, we're going to want to run all of our wires into the storage compartment, and the first one we're going to do is the power line that plugs into the red side of the battery, the positive side, and it also has an inline fuse. But while we're back here, we're going to want to run a second one, which is what this yellow one is, and this yellow one is a power line that runs to the amp that's mounted under the dash. But while you're back here, you might as well knock them both out and get that line running, just so you don't have to repeat a step. You can use 2 inline red fuses if you want. I just chose to use the yellow one so I could differentiate between the front amp and the rear powered sub. Now I'm just going to add that ground wire to the negative ground wire from the battery that's already in place and run it into the passenger compartment for the powered sub. Okay, so the battery's back in. Just remember not to hook up your negative yet until you're all done. And I have the negative for the powered sub running through, and I have, can't really see it back there, but I have the positive hooked to the battery, and they are both running through right there, right through that hole. I just got them coming out here. Okay, so now we're to the wiring portion, and we're gonna start with the amp in the back. And all the wires I ran came through that same hole that we've already pointed out. So I've got them all right here ready to solder so that we can solder to the harness that plugs into the amp. And then I got them all going forward. So we're gonna start back here and work our way forward. And I'll explain all these wires along the way. So to do that, first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna solder the ground and the power to the ground wire and power wire that we already talked about. And then we'll probably solder the remote turn on to the amp, which is gonna be one of these orange wires. That's all I had, so I just used it. But I marked them on both sides. So it says remote here, and then on the front end when we plug into the harness for the head unit, it says remote amp. So same with all the speaker wires. So I've got positive passenger, negative passenger, and then positive negative for the driver. So then when I get to the other end, I'm not playing a guessing game of which wire goes where. So we're gonna, oh, and this is the remote for the bass knob that goes up front in the passenger compartment, so you can turn up your, turn up and down the level on your bass. So, and that's all ran on this side of the vehicle. So that is one thing I want to point out. You don't have to take that plastic piece off on the driver's side of the vehicle, which I did because I didn't know exactly where I was going to be popping a hole through. And we ended up having this hole that's already on this side. And you'll notice there's not one over there. So I'm running everything over here. So let's just get started. We're going to start soldering this harness all together back here. Put the carpet back in, run all the wires to the amp, plug in the amp. During this install process, you're going to see that I used a lot of different options when connecting wires. For example, using terminals versus soldering. And I did this along the way just depending on what I was doing and what made the most sense. And ultimately, when it came to the power wire and the ground wire on the powered sub, I decided to use a pair of butt terminals because I was having a hard time soldering these wires together for some reason. And then I used a pair of shrink wrap over the butt terminals and a pair of zip ties to tie the ground and power wire together just for some added strength. The way I ran these wires into the storage compartment was under the carpet, up against the wall, behind the amp, and up into the connection onto the amp. So I don't really see a lot of opportunity for this wire to get tugged on, and I'm not concerned about it coming apart.
Don't leave me here high and dry. Oh, but I don't wanna jinx it, baby. Let's not get ahead of my time. Oh, but I don't wanna miss you, baby. So I stand up and speak just my mind. Oh.
As far as the remote turn on for the powered subwoofer, and the speaker cables for the sound signal, I did solder all of those wires and then cover them with shrink wrap.
You're chilling wind and rain. You're some kind of butterfly. Baby, you give me midnight. You whip up my appetite. Don't leave me high and dry. Baby, you give me ice and fire.
After getting the wires soldered, I used some automotive wrap just to clean them up. Then I fed all the wires through the battery compartment hole and into the storage compartment, where we will cover them with carpet and install the amp and plug it in.
Okay guys, there it is. That's how it turned out. Carpet's back in. The sub is mounted. And there's your wiring right there. One thing you're gonna have to be careful with is that seat belt runs super close to those wires. I might get some zip ties and tie it down, maybe to like this empty bolt on the other side, just to pull it down. I probably will do that. But I think it turned out good. There's minimal space back here, and this doesn't take up a lot of it, so you're saving your storage. And this is why I kind of went with this option. I just wanted that storage, and I didn't want the sub pounding me, but I did want a little bass in my music. So let's move on. Okay, so now we're gonna wire up the driver's side speaker. I've already done the passenger side because I just kind of wanted to knock one out just to make this video a little quicker. But I'll go through every step that you need to do, including wiring the LED lights of the speaker. And as you can see, I left this open. I am not gonna clean this up or put any pieces on until the stereo is all put together and I test it out, just in case I run into an issue. But I am going to use some more of that automotive covering wire to clean this up before I put the side panel back on. So we'll do that as well. But one thing I wanted to point out is you don't want to forget to run your LED wiring when you get to this point. So I ran it through the other side, and this is it coming out. And we'll get into the top side of this after we wire up the bottom side and tuck the speaker away. So let's just get into wiring the speaker, and then we'll move on to connecting all the LED lights up top.
Okay, these were the stock wires that were hooked into the stock driver's side speaker, and typically you could just plug these right back into the new speaker. But remember, I'm still in the sound signal for the amp because I didn't use RCA cables. So we're gonna cut them off, and then these are the wires that came from the amp, and we're gonna cut those off, and then we're gonna add a pigtail. So essentially we're gonna have 3 wires going into the same location. So I'm not gonna solder here because soldering 3 wires is kind of a pain in the butt. Instead, I'm gonna use a terminal cap, and then I'm gonna tape them off with some electrical tape just for some added strength.
Baby, you give me midnight. You whip up my appetite. Don't leave me here high and dry. Oh, well, I don't wanna jinx it, baby. Can't twist myself.
And now I'm going to add another terminal on the pigtail so that I can plug this directly into the new speakers. So there'll be a positive and a negative terminal, one on each pigtail. And again, you'll notice that I have all of my wires marked with some tape just so I know which ones are positive and negative. And this is something I did when I ran them on both ends just so I wouldn't get confused.
But I don't wanna jinx it, baby. Let's not get ahead of my time. Oh.
And after you get one done, you just rinse and repeat for the other side. And then you have both your positive and negative to plug into the speaker. And they're also going to the powered subwoofer to give it the sound signal.
Baby, you give me ice and fire. You're giving me wind and rain. You're some kind of butterfly. Baby, you give me midnight. You whip up my appetite. Don't leave me here high and dry. Oh, well, I don't wanna jinx it, baby.
And there you go, you have your positive and negative to plug into your new speaker, and the passenger side speaker was done exactly the same way. Okay, now we're just going to get the LED wiring prepped. We're going to strip it back and expose the 4 LED wires, and they're all color coded. So this is just direct matching the colors up, and it's just a single wire connection, so we are going to solder them. You'll see right there, there's the speaker connections. And then there's the LED wires right there, and like I said, we're just going to match up the colors. Also going to put a piece of shrink tubing over each wire after we solder it.
Let's not get ahead of my time. Oh, but I don't wanna miss you, baby. So I stand up and speak just my mind. You're chilling wind and rain. You're some kind of butterfly. Baby, you give me midnight.
After we're all done soldering, just take a good piece of electrical tape and wrap all the wires on both ends of the soldering just for some added strength.
You give me ice and fire. You're chilling wind and rain. You're some kind of butterfly.
Then when you're done with that, you can just plug in your negative and positive for your speaker. And because these are marine grade speakers, they do have this little container that covers those connections. And you just put the connection or the container over the connections and then use a zip tie just to snug it down to make sure it doesn't come open. And now you can take the whole speaker and all the wires, shove it back in the hole, and screw the speaker in.
Okay, so as you can see, I got both speakers mounted inside. And now what we're gonna do is come up top and we're gonna wire the speaker wires, which I forgot to mention, the speaker wires in there. Make sure you follow them up here so you know which one's positive and negative. So that's the passenger side, and this green one is the driver's side. And before I mounted those speakers in there, I followed the wires all the way up here to make sure I knew which one was positive. But all we need to do is wire both side speakers to the harness that goes to the Bluetooth receiver. So I'm just gonna wire white positive and negative, and gray positive and negative. And then if you remember, I ran that orange wire from the amp, so this is a remote amp. These are typically blue, so I'm gonna wire it right to the blue wire, and that turns on the amp in the back when the Bluetooth turns on. And this one I'm just gonna cap, this pink one. We'll cap it because it's for an antenna, and this does not have a radio in it, it's just a Bluetooth receiver. So we'll cap it to make sure it doesn't hit on any bare metal. And then we are going to connect these two ground wires to the two ground wires that were already grounded right in there from the old stereo. So I'll probably just strip both these back and solder them together for the ground. And then after that, we'll do the LED stuff. And then last but not least, we'll do the power. So right now, starting with speaker wire.
So if I wasn't clear, these white wires are the stock wires that were connected to the stock passenger side speaker. So they were connected to the original amplifier harness, and we cut them off, and now we're just going to resolder them into the new harness, and we're going to just match up white positive and negative for that connection. The green wires on my right are for the driver's side, and same story there, except we're going to match them up to the new harness on the gray wires, negative and positive.
Baby, you give me ice and fire. You whip up my appetite. Don't leave me here high and dry. Baby, you give me ice and fire. You're channeling wind and rain. You're some kind of butterfly. Baby, you give me midnight. You whip up my appetite. Don't leave me here.
And right here, we're just going to take that antenna wire and we're going to cap it with the terminal and put some tape around it just to make sure that it doesn't touch any metal. And again, the reason we're doing this is because there's no radio in this. This is just a Bluetooth head unit. And now we're going to solder that blue wire into the orange wire for the remote turn on the powered subwoofer. And now we're just going to take the two black grounding wires from the new harness and solder them into the two black grounding wires from the old harness. Keep in mind on the old harness that I just cut this from the old harness, but I left the wires grounded to their original grounding point.
But I don't wanna jinx it, baby. Let's not get ahead of my time. Oh, but I don't wanna miss you, baby. So I stand up and speak just my mind. Oh. You're chilling wind and rain. You're some kind of butterfly. Baby, you give me midnight.
Now we're going to make all of the LED connections into the LED harness. And keep in mind that we have both the driver's side and passenger side LED speakers. So we're not going to be soldering this time because we have several of the same wires going to one point. So this is another one of those situations where we're just going to use terminal caps, put them all together, match up the colors, and then tape off the terminal caps just for a little added strength. Now we're going to be connecting the wiring harness that attaches to the amp under the dash to power. So if you remember earlier, I ran a line to the battery that had a yellow inline fuse, and this is that line that I ran. So this is where we connect that power.
Don't leave me here high and dry. Oh, oh, oh,
Just like the powered subwoofer, I chose to use a butt connection terminal to make this connection because, like I said, I was having a hard time soldering this thicker wire for some reason. That, and I've got 2 yellow wires running into the other end. After you clamp down the other side into the connection, just put another piece of shrink wrap over that connection and shrink it down. And then you're just going to take the included 2 fuses on the yellow lines that came with the wiring harness and plug them back in on both ends. And then you just take the included plastic pieces and cover those fuses.
you're giving me wind and rain. You're some kind of butterfly. Baby, you give me midnight.
And now you'll notice that we're down to one last red wire coming off the harness that connects to the amp under the dash. And I want to talk about this wire for a minute because this is one of the wires that hooks into the Bluetooth toggle switch that we talked about at the beginning of the video.
So I want to touch on this real quick. This is the Bluetooth switch that was with the stock Bluetooth system that you could just throw and it'd kill the Bluetooth system. But I want to wire it to both the new Bluetooth system and the LED lights and the speakers so that I can kill them both at the same time without having to push power on this and power on the LED remote. So if I retain that switch, I can just throw it and not have to worry about a drain on my battery. To do that, if you'll remember, under the dash there is a fuse under there that I reused that was with the vehicle from the old amp, and that's where this wire comes into, and then it goes down into that fuse, and then the other side of the fuse comes back up. The reason I did that is because I don't want to take apart the dash if that fuse pops. But then that wire runs right into here, into the Bluetooth switch, and then when it's off, it won't provide power to the LED or the amp. So this runs into the LED lights, and then the other wire that's tacked on there runs right back down in there to the amp that goes to the Bluetooth. So that's how you run that, and you don't have to run all the wires to the battery like you did with the constant power that's on the Bluetooth amp. Okay, the stereos is all in, but before I clean this all up and make it look pretty and put it in auto wrap, I wanted to go through all the wires in case I forgot something while I was recording. And we're gonna start at the top end here. Actually, we're gonna start under the dash. Okay, so here's the amp. I kind of just mounted it where the stock amp was. As you can see, I reused the stock amp's fuse. And we'll talk more about that up top because it's all wired up top. I just put it down here so I could get to it in case this fuse blew. I will tell you the USB port right here is constant power, so you can charge your phone even with the vehicle off that USB port. I'm gonna get a long cable and kind of just set it up where I can reach it from the driver's seat. These are cables so that you can plug in your phone if you don't want to use Bluetooth. But I found that Bluetooth connects super quick and it's pretty solid, so I don't think I'm gonna have to use those. And then just the wiring harness off the amp, and we'll talk more about that up top. Okay, back up top, we're gonna talk about the stock fuse I left in line that's underneath. This wire comes off of that fuse and into the wiring harness down here and into this power block. And I didn't touch this side of that wire because this is from the stock wire. I just cut it, took it from 2 wires and put it down to 1 and reattached it, and it goes into that fuse, and then the other side of that fuse comes out this other red wire, and it comes into the Bluetooth switch down there where I can turn it off and on. And then the other side of that switch comes this other red wire, and it comes right into here, and it plugs right into the LED lights on the speakers. So that's what controls the LED lights. And then this wire right here, it's actually black. It just kind of looks red because it was attached to this one, is the ground. And I just ran it all the way down here, right into that ground point, and grounded it with those other grounds. So that's your LED lights. So back to the wiring harness. You have your two yellow wires that are your constant power, and I ran them into one wire right here, and then that wire just follows that path and goes to the battery. And then you have two ground wires coming up off the amp, and I actually just tapped them right into the ground wire that was already there off the other amp, and that grounds right here. So I didn't even have to touch that because the wire's already there. I just cut it and tapped into them right there. And then you'll have your pink wire, which is your antenna, but this isn't a stereo, it's a Bluetooth stereo, so I just capped that off and taped it so that it wouldn't touch any metal. And then you have your blue wire, which is your remote turn on that tells the subwoofer and with the integrated amp to turn on. So that just kind of follows this power wire as well, kicks down and goes back to the sub. And then you have these two green and two white wires, which are from the stock speakers up front. And I just tapped the speaker wires from the harness into those, and then they go down to the speakers and run those speakers. So I think I covered up everything up top. I'll just take you around the side here. All those speaker wires, and I already showed you that they all run in together because they're technically giving the signal to the subwoofer to turn on inside the speaker walls, and we already got into that, so I'm not going to touch that. And then all these speaker wires and the power wire and the remote wire run back here, and they all run into the battery. And then we already covered hooking up the amp, so I'm not going to get into that. Okay, now I'm going to clean up all these wires and just show you how it looks real quick when it's done. All right, here's the side cleaned up. All ran through this automotive protective wire and just kind of zip tied down. And it just follows it up. Same thing up here. These are the speaker wires. And you'll see the remote wire pop out right there, and it goes that way into the nest. And then the speaker wire goes down. So I'm happy with that. Looks clean enough to me. I'm gonna start slapping the car back together.
Okay, now that the car's back together, I just want to talk about relocating the heater control vent. And this is ultimately where I decided to put it. And I found this bracket kicking around my garage. It worked out perfectly. You'll remember that it was originally behind the head unit, and the head unit took up all that space, so I had to move it. And what I ultimately did was use an existing bolt and tied that bracket into it, and then I ran the control module through a hole on the front of it. And you'll notice there's a black washer there, and the hole was a little too big, so I used that black washer to close up that hole. Worked out great. It's a solid connection, and I actually prefer it here. It's easier to get to. I also want to touch on the bass control knob for the powered sub, and I mounted it under the dash, and you can see that it's super bright right now, but the LED is not that bright in real life. I drilled a couple holes through the glove box to mount this, and then there's a piece of carpet inside the glove box that I just replaced, and it covered those bolts on the inside. The last thing I wanted to touch on is the functionality of the Bluetooth toggle switch, and you'll remember that I wanted to be able to throw this and kill the head unit and the LED speakers, but as a side note, it'll also kill the subwoofer in the back and turn out the LED light underneath the dash. This turned out perfect. It's just like the stock version, and now I don't have to worry about a drain on my battery, as you'll see in a second. And now I just want to give you a quick demo of the actual stereo and how it sounds. and I've got to say that I'm 100% satisfied with this turnout. I will say through video it doesn't sound as good. The vocals aren't as crisp, and the bass doesn't punch quite as hard, so keep that in mind, but I think you'll get the idea. It really did turn out good. Before I wrap this up, I wanted to touch on a troubleshooting issue I had, and it involved a 200 amp circuit breaker similar to the one you see in front of you. One of these is mounted in the battery compartment directly above the battery, and during this install I must have mistakenly tripped it, and I didn't even know it was there. At the end of the install I went to start the Vanderhall and nothing happened, and this gave me a real scare. Luckily I got on some Facebook forums and some people pointed me in the right direction, and once I reset this circuit breaker, everything worked fine. And I just wanted to point it out in case someone else out there ran into the same problem. That's it for this one, guys, but if you had a question, make sure you hit me up in the comments section, and I'll try to answer your question promptly and to the best of my ability. So until next time, guys, this is Nick with Ido Up, and keep up.
Some kind of